Greetings, friends. Operational situation at the front on the 10th of April. Today, we will talk at the end about an interesting news background, of course. Well, we will start with the Limansky section of the front, where we continue fighting east of Ternov, as well as in the Serebryansky forest. And, let's just say, today we state that there is some decline, although I hope you remember that the enemy has transferred to Kremenaya and is concentrating, pulling forces directly in the direction of the settlement of Terny. That is, it is in a small landing in our forest area. So I concentrated it in about this area. But so far, it is not taking assault actions, it is not moving closer. Most likely, he will either try to accumulate even more, or he will reconsider his tactics in this sector of the front as a whole. But so far there has been a decline, although there has been movement. Perhaps, so to speak, they will add, accumulate and start, but so far we are seeing a decline, so we do not fix any changes. As for Bologorovka, yesterday we bypassed it. To date, we have information that fighting continues, fighting with varying success. It means that there is also a lot of activity on the part of the APU in attacks. A large number of attackers are involved in drones. So far without any changes, although there has been really very high activity in this sector of the front in recent days. Now as for the notch. Yesterday, both by the enemy in the evening and closer to night, there was some information from our side that the assault operations were continuing along the railway in the north direction. Actually, we have been talking about this a lot in recent days, where they attacked initially east of the railway, then from positions that were along the railway, then northeast and west. And the actual situation we had remained on clarification. Gray area. To date, there are further reports that they are carrying out assault actions further, so it is still being clarified here. But it was not possible to gain a foothold in those positions that they carried out assaults on which they carried out assaults. But there was no information from the AFU that it was possible to restore control over these positions, so there remains a gray zone. Now Uter is also carrying out assault operations along the railway and trying to continue from the northeastern of those positions, or to the west, southwest of the positions that previously carried out the assault, in the direction of the railway. Fights with varying success. But in any case, we state that yes, during the week, the enemy remains quite active here and is aimed, well, based on what is visually visible from satellites, at approximately this area, where there is a large support for which you can cling, gain a foothold. There is a logistical shoulder, yes. And for this, of course, the Russian troops also need to level the situation between, therefore, the ledge that is formed, and, accordingly, most likely, because they will not go west here, they will be able to level the front line by taking a number of supports to the east. But we are voicing the worst-case scenario, and what, based on the attack vector, the enemy is currently targeting. Therefore, so far there have been no significant changes, but active battles continue. We turn to the Our Yar. The very heavy battles for Bogdanovka are still going on. Golyabovsky 2 Mortar Reserve, deciduous forest. In general, everything remains within the gray zone so far. There have been no new frames, visual confirmations of further progress. Moreover, there were no reports from the enemy. Most likely this is due to the fact that the formed protrusions, they allow you to make a certain maneuver. And now, most likely, the Russian command is considering where to commit it. I mean, either what we voiced, from the reserve of the Golyabovsky 2 mortars in the southern direction to strike at the Ivanovo forest, and, accordingly, from a position south of the Ivanovo in the western direction. Try to put the squeeze on the Ivanovo or the Golyabovsky 2 mortars in this way. Continue the assault operations due to the fact that there are northern flanking positions and a forest belt with supports. Try to take it as well. Accordingly, we also have a deciduous forest and Bogdanovka itself due to the formed ledge. Therefore, now there are several options, and most likely the enemy is viewing it, where to strike. It cannot be said that due to the fact that we do not make any changes that the activity has subsided. No. The activity is quite high. So far the enemy has rested and, pulling up forces, decides where to strike the next sufficiently large blow based on the information that the forces were transferred to Bakhmut. This is at least a few dozen, including several dozen units of offensive armored vehicles. Therefore, the situation remains quite tense for us, otherwise in the Yar direction. So far, we state the situation without significant changes. We are moving to the Avdiivka direction. Here we have a lot of activity on the part of the enemy, and we are moving to Novokalinov. On previous broadcasts, we added a gray zone and left the situation to be clarified east of the settlement, where the attack was from Novobakhmutovka. As of today, we state the progress from Krasnogorsk in the direction of Novokalinov. There are changes along one of the forest belts, which means in the direction of the settlement itself, and along a small section of the forest belt just north of the railway. Here, the enemy managed to advance to a depth of 820 meters and gain a foothold. At the same time, it must be stated that the fighting continues between Novobakhmutovka and the Novokaliny site. That is, also do not forget that there are assault operations taking place here, so the pace of hostilities is quite high. At the same time, there is also an attempt between Novokalinov and Berdykh to advance from the Russian troops north of Berdykh. So it was possible to repel this attack. A small section of the gray zone has not been added, but in any case, the enemy is now showing maximum activity here. And taking into account the fact that in Berdykh, we will conditionally say for now, it was possible to stop his advance. So far, they are attacking mainly, as we said yesterday, and we will repeat today, with infantry, not so much with armored vehicles. But at the same time, armored vehicles are used to probe the defense in neighboring areas. I mean between Berdykh and Novokalinov. So far, the gray zone has not changed. According to Semenovka, the situation is similar. So far it is more positional in nature. Where are we seeing the fighting? In Semenovka itself. That is, here without any changes. The enemy maintains a presence in the southern part, while pressing very hard in the direction of the center of the T-shaped intersection. But no changes have been noticed. As for Uman, here, Uman Yasnobrodovka will be more accurate to say even. We have several changes here. The first point is, of course, in the direction of Umansky himself. Just yesterday, we were talking about the fact that they are most likely to try Y and the vector in the Grone in the northwest direction. Because there is a section for which you can cling, gain a foothold, and disperse your forces. And here the enemy managed to advance on a front section up to 720 meters wide to a depth of 1 kilometer. At the same time, we observed from drone footage that a significantly gray zone was added, I mean geolinking of drone footage. Gaint, the enemy carried out assault operations, as we expected. Yasnobrodovka, or rather, they even turned not onto Yasnobrodovka itself, but what they said. They would try to bypass the beam north of Vodian. Therefore, we have also added a gray zone in this area. The situation as of yesterday, the situation today is complicated. It is very difficult, because we have noted the positions that, where Russian troops have gained a foothold, but there are positions that undergo regular assault operations. And now a huge number of positions are still being clarified, because before it was possible, as you remember. We commented on this situation twice yesterday on 2 broadcasts. Attack an abandoned field reservoir. It was then possible to repel both attacks from north to south and from east to west, but, as we see, Russian tanks and armored vehicles turned out to be much to the west of these positions. So far, the activity is very, very large. At the same time, only if we speak for yesterday, the Russian troops. The Russian troops involved about 20, under 20 armored vehicles. 17, 16, 18 were voiced there, well, in general, about 20. This is what got into the drone footage. And at the same time, we are talking not only Zamanskaya, I repeat, but also the Yasnobrodovka section, and an attempt to bypass the very beam that we have northwest of Vodian. Therefore, we continue active military operations here. This is the situation we have in the Avdiivka direction. Quite complex, I would say, activity, as you can see. We will conditionally speak from Pervomaysky to Novobakhmutovka, yes. But it is very high, very high. And the opponents, of course, what I complained about yesterday, due to numerical superiority. And then, not only in personnel and tactical aviation, but also in technology, allows itself to try to look for a gap in the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. And, unfortunately, he manages to find them periodically, if we state the present day of Novokalinova and Umanskaya. Moving on. Krasnogorovka. The gray zone has been adjusted here. Active hostilities continue on the southeastern outskirts of Krasnogorskovka. Fresh footage from the AFU was published. So what happened at this point? We had already made 2 adjustments then, so it means at the first house, at the second house, where Russian troops were present. At the same time, we observe the following picture. There was a landing, that is, we stopped again in Krasnogorovka itself, but we stopped not from the Staromykhailovka side, but from the south, from the side of the veins. The trunks of the Trudovskaya mine in the north direction. The landing was a landing, and accordingly, active combat work began on the part of the AFU. The armored vehicle was hit, and 2-story buildings began to work out artillery and drones on the same building. So, a gray area has been added. To date, the situation looks roughly as follows. So far, he says that it will be possible to gain a foothold. I cannot even gain a foothold for the Russian troops, because very serious forces are involved on the part of the AFU in order to naturally avoid such a turn of events. As we also talked about yesterday, that this is an urban type of battle, it requires huge resources. Human, artillery equipment, and so on and so on. Naturally, the opponent, having superiority, tries to impose his tactics and continue to play attrition. Therefore, all necessary measures for stabilization are being taken here by the AFU. But I repeat, I can't give any forecasts yet, because there are a number of points for me. It seems that so far my opinion is that it will be possible to stabilize the situation. But we will see, as they say. The fact that the work is still active. In general, the Kurikov direction is without any changes, meaning Georgiivka, Pobeda, and the west of Mariinka. Novomikhailovka, let's move on to it. Here we continue fighting along Centralnaya Street. The enemy is still pressing. A little later, I will post it in my Telegram, a little later, probably in 3 hours. Geo point and additional changes, if there are any on the map, but for now let's focus on what we see visually now. There was an attempt to advance along the street. The central attack was previously repelled. The information is being clarified. In general, if anything, the map will be adjusted. But in general, I will publish it in a few hours. As for the south, there was more pressure from the north, and in Novomikhailovka itself from the south, it was possible to stop the enemy. But in general, unfortunately, he managed to advance on a front section up to 6 meters wide, to a depth of 500 meters. Well, of course, clarification. Added a situation. Let's look at the changes for yesterday. The situation today is still the same. He does not refuse to strike from the south in a northwesterly direction because there is very heavy fighting in the center. As we can see, it has been possible to restrain them very seriously lately. Although there have been minimal advances on the part of the enemy, but they are being given very, very serious efforts. Here is this very urban type of combat, close-range shooting, including from the side. There is a huge activity by drones. The most enormous, I would say. Therefore, the enemy is trying to find workarounds, but in general, alas, we already understand that it is a matter of time. Unfortunately. Because, having clung, of course, to the locality, as the practice of the last 2 years has shown, it is already the 3rd year. The opponent starts fighting for him afterwards. Let it be a long year and a half, like Vodian, Pervomaysk, Marenko, Avdiivka, but still it will push. Therefore, it is extremely difficult to talk about any stabilization now. It is extremely difficult, because the enemy is clearly aimed at him and uses the appropriate resources in order to further advance, and is looking for, trying to find workarounds to avoid prolonged fighting in the central part of the settlement. Well, of course, and bets on the north and the south. This is the situation we have in the South Donetsk sector of the front. Well, we are moving with you to the Zaporozhye section of the Orkhov front direction of work. Clarifications and changes that have occurred have been added here. The AFU published footage of a strike on the Russian BTR-82, and the enemy made an attempt to advance, which means that firm a position southwest of work to work on itself and past not only the southern part, but also closer to the center, where the BTR was already destroyed according to the geopoint of the geolinking of drone footage. But at the same time, we have said that another street has turned into a gray zone. A red zone has been added, because here it is actually controlled by the enemy. Well, he just wouldn't have been able to cross freely and move on armored vehicles if he hadn't taken control. Therefore, the situation for yesterday, the situation for today, is here at a shallow depth of up to 250, somewhere up to 300 meters of advance. But this, I would say, is more of a clarification. Well, the situation, in fact, remains for further clarification, because active hostilities continue. The enemy is also now trying to gain a foothold, namely, to gain a foothold in the southern part of the settlement, attacking with small assault groups of 2-7 people along several vectors, that is, both along the road itself going in a northerly direction and within several streets in the school area. Further attempts are being made to catch on and gain a foothold for a number of positions. Battles, by the way, despite the fact that the enemy is now using small assault groups. The fights are really tough. Hard-earned. They are going very hard. And so far the situation is relatively stable. Well, it is clear that there is also promotion. We are talking about a relatively stable situation. There are no breakthroughs that exist in other sectors of the front. But the enemy does not abandon its plans, and also, if we say it has already been earned, as well as for other sectors of the front, it is playing for exhaustion, for a long time. Therefore, I commented on the situation in this sector of the front. So far, no significant changes. Minimally added a gray zone and an adjustment to the south of the support. They asked us to comment on the markets, because we haven't said anything for about 2 weeks, but in fact nothing is happening there yet. In other words, the same combat work that we had before continues, but we have not recorded any changes. Naturally, I told you that the bet may be on a big green card, but there is still no green card, it still needs time. I said that closer to the middle end of May, I expect some activity in general in the Kherson direction. But we will comment on this a month later. Therefore, there are no changes now.